Hello, my name is Khalid and today we're having an in-depth, hands-on look at the Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus. At around €500, the EInk tablet is pretty expensive and still has some flaws and head scratchers which can definitely influence buying decision. So naturally, I am pointing them out in this review. Just to let you know, I will mention the Huawei made with paper a few times throughout this review. If you haven't done so already, I recommend you also watch my hands-on review of that, linked in the description below. So let's get started. When taking the device out of the box, the Note Air 2 Plus immediately feels high-end, because it's super thin and has a one-piece aluminum frame around the sides and on the back. The flush touchscreen on the front emphasizes that feeling. The bezels around the screen are relatively narrow, with only being wider on one side, providing a secure grip of the tablet. But looking a bit closer, there are three things I don't like about this build. First, the edges of the touchscreen are not completely flush with the frame. This results in feeling the edges when running my fingers over them, and those edges gather a bit of dust. It's a small detail and actually easy to clean, but it's still annoying, especially because it's not a cheap product. 2. The power button placement on the edge of the grip. Although I didn't press the button accidentally since I bought the Note Air 2 Plus, but I imagine it can happen depending on how you hold the device. Holding it in the left hand when writing with the right will put your hand directly over that button. And even when not pressing it accidentally, I can still feel the edge of the button on my hand. And number 3, the weight is pretty heavy. With 455 grams, it's 23% heavier than the Huawei made with paper, which weighs only 360 grams. This difference is very noticeable and makes handling the Onyx Boox tablet clunkier. Holding a tablet in one hand for longer periods of time is more exhausting as a result. Although the tablet is super thin with its 5.8mm thickness, the build itself feels incredibly sturdy. It's not prone to flex even when trying, so I have no worries in putting it in my bag. However, you should get a case for it, because the screen itself is not very scratch resistant, as I learned. In the 6 weeks since I got the device, I already have a visible scratch in the bezel around the screen. Lucky for me, it's not directly above the display, but for me it's a clear sign that the tablet should be handled with care. Unlike my Kindle Oasis, which I've been using for over 2 years without a case, even had it with me on the beach, and it still doesn't have a scratch on the screen. The Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus also comes with a passive Wacom stylus in the box. The tip is a bit pointier than the one on the Huawei M Pencil I reviewed recently, and also doesn't seem to wear off as fast. The stylus has a good size and rests well in the hand, however, it feels a bit cheap in my opinion. In my review of the Huawei made with paper, I praised the quality of the M Pencil because it almost feels and looks like metal. The Onyx stylus, on the other hand, looks and feels much cheaper. The ribbed design doesn't really help with that in my opinion. But luckily, you can use another one compatible with the touchscreen technology. I'm using a Stylus stylus, for example, which is a bit smaller, but in my opinion feels much nicer to the touch. The downside of using another stylus like that, you often can't attach it to the side of the tablet. Which brings us to another issue I have. I really dislike the placement of the original pen on the tablet. When not in use, you can just attach it to the side of the device where it is held magnetically. In general, that works well, but it feels a bit flimsy because the stylus always pushes a little bit to the back instead of being centered. And I actually dropped the stylus more than once because it got loose that way. Let's have a closer look at the screen. The Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus uses EInk cutter display technology, which provides good contrast levels and, as always, is perfectly readable even in direct sunlight. It's the same technology as in popular e-readers, which means that its main purpose is reading text. I will come to the specifics of using Android with the EInk display a bit later. With a pixel density of 227 ppi, it's not on par with the latest smaller e-readers, which typically have 300 ppi, but it's still plenty for a nice reading experience. In day-to-day usage, you don't really notice the pixels on the screen. Everything looks nice and crisp. Let's have a look at lighting quality. Again, same as popular e-readers, the Note Air 2 Plus uses a front light to illuminate the screen. The LEDs are located inside the grip, which means the display is side-lit. I mentioned this specifically because side-lit displays are usually a bit more prone to irregularities, or at least you notice them more. That's also the case here. The light distribution is okay, but you can still notice a slight brightness gradient from one side to the other. It's not incredibly obvious, but can still be seen with the naked eye. So if you're very sensitive to this kind of thing, you should keep this in mind before buying the device. The Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus also offers color temperature adjustment of the inbuilt light. There are two sliders in the UI which allow to control the cold and warm LEDs to be adjusted separately. But at least to me, the icons on the UI make no sense whatsoever. The sun symbol controls the warm LEDs, the moon symbol controls the cold LEDs. Usually it's the other way around. Mixing the LEDs works well without any color clouds or unwanted color effects. One issue I have with the screen seems to be the result of the anti-reflective layer. Barely visible, but still noticeable in everyday use. There's these subtle shadows all over the screen. I suspect this is a result of etching the surface. When using the inbuilt lighting, I tend to see them mainly on the empty parts of the page, which is why I personally don't find them too distracting. But there's really no reason for them to be there in the first place, especially when you keep the high price in mind. Let's talk a short bit about performance, because I made a huge deal about it in the Huawei MatePad paper review, because the Huawei tablet is currently the most powerful e-ink tablet on the market. Long story short, the Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus is not as fast, but still plenty powerful for everyday use. On an e-ink tablet, the screen is usually the limiting factor performance-wise, which is also true here. The Note Air 2 Plus uses a Snapdragon 646, which is an 8-core budget CPU with up to 2 GHz of clock speed, accompanied by 4 GB of RAM. In Geekbench 5, the Note Air 2 Plus manages a score of 302 points in single-core performance and 1327 points in multi-core performance. Just for the sake of completeness, the tablet also has an inbuilt microphone, speaker, Bluetooth and 46 GB of non-expandable internal storage. Of that, only 46 GB are freely available to use. The quality of the speaker is okay, as to be expected from a mono speaker in a device this thin. The recording quality of the microphone is fine as well, but the placement is not the best for lefties. When holding the tablet in the right hand to write with the left, you tend to place your hand directly over the microphone. Let's come to the software part of things. The Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus uses a customized version of Android 11. That means you can run pretty much any Android app that will work with the e-ink screen. The home screen layout is pretty well laid out in my opinion. Everything is at its place and where to expect it, and thanks to some useful Android skinning, the whole UI works well on the e-ink screen. Two things to mention. There are quite a few customization options to choose from, which I always love in having. While the Huawei MatePad paper is borderline uncustomizable, the Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus is pretty much the opposite. However, the Onyx UI looks and feels less polished than the competition. It's mostly small things, like not so perfect translations or missing text margins, but UI feels a bit more cluttered, which might have something to do with the fact that you simply have more options. When first using the device, there's so much to discover that it takes a few days to actually get to know everything. That can be a bit overwhelming if you're not used to having that many options on the device. If you don't feel like using the default Onyx launcher, you can simply install an alternative one and use that. Generally, the Boox Note Air 2 Plus runs smoothly, stable and without any hiccups. I'm actually quite happy about it. But you shouldn't expect award-winning battery life. By default, the device completely shuts off after 15 minutes of not using it, which is something smaller e-readers from mainstream manufacturers like Amazon or Kobo don't do as fast. I guess the reason for that is the generally shorter battery life. The Google Play Store is pre-installed and can be used for installing Android apps, so you don't have to rely on side loading to get your apps on the device. That's especially useful if you want to use paid apps which usually rely on the Play Store to check for payment status. However, to be completely honest with you, I don't feel super comfortable in using my main Google account on the device and wouldn't do any online banking or other sensitive stuff on it either. Why, you ask? Because my concern with Onyx Boox in general is privacy. There are a couple of discussions on the internet mentioning the company's devices are calling home frequently. What do I mean by calling home? Pretty much every smart device is pinging or contacting external services on a regular basis. That's normal because at the very least it checks for updates. But there's also the data gathering part, which usually happens automatically and anonymized in the background. I'm not a big fan of that, but still pretty normal stuff. With Google and other Silicon Valley companies, we know the deal, mostly. The Note Air 2 Plus is no exception here. As it runs Android 11, it also uses Google services, which means the OS regularly connects to Google servers. But it also seems to connect to different IPs connected to Chinese cloud services. And at least to me, it's not clear why this is necessary and what data is actually being transmitted. However, to be completely fair, when first setting up the device, you have to actually agree to the privacy policy, which lists Onyx ID, email address, mobile number, login information, user feedback, and a few cloud-related stuff as being transmitted to Onyx. Onyx also states that they adhere to the GDPR, which is the privacy protection law in the EU. So why I feel better that there's actually a privacy policy for some international markets in place. The discussions on Reddit and other platforms still make me a bit nervous in using sensitive data on the device. My solution is to cut all unnecessary network traffic. A sure way to do that is rooting a device and installing a firewall. In doing so, I can whitelist only hand-picked apps and simply block everything else from accessing the internet. And that's exactly what I did with the Note Air 2 Plus. The process itself is not too complicated, but generating the boot image involved some trial and error. If you're interested in rooting the Note Air 2 Plus, sub to my channel, I will post a root tutorial shortly. Onyx optimized the UI for the EInk screen, which also means you can switch manually between 4 different EInk modes in the EInk center. That's reachable by swiping up in the bottom left area of the screen, so you can quickly switch between modes if needed. The normal mode works the same way as on any e-reader. It shows contents in high quality, but isn't the fastest for refreshing the screen. That can be a problem for more dynamic Android apps. The other 3 modes are switching the screen to different speed modes, which also reduce display quality to various degrees. Sometimes you might even need to switch to one of the other modes in a slow Android app because the app is not optimized for the grayscale screen and might not offer enough contrast. Other modes can help with that because they reduce color depth. But there's more. You can set individual display settings per app, can change DPI, some font and background settings, and also adjust EInk refresh behavior. Same as with the PDF function, which I will come to in a bit. There are so many options to make Android apps on EInk usable that I doubt you will run into any major problems with any of the typical apps. The customization options are best in class and show that Onyx is optimizing Android for EInk usage for quite some time now. Let's check out one of the biggest selling points of the device, which is also in its name, taking notes. There's a dedicated notes section on the launcher, which brings you directly to the notes list. From there you can either create or open a note. You also have the option to create folders for better organization. A few customization options like setting the languages for the AI hand recognition, different auto refresh settings and auto save settings are also available from there. Like I already said, I'm a bit suspicious regarding data privacy, so I didn't use the sync function, which is also available with an Onyx account. For that, I personally would use a folder sync app and choose my own cloud service. Thanks to Android 11, you can pretty much run all modern Android apps which will run on EInk. The Notes app itself is also pretty feature-packed. You have the option to change the canvas size, create multiple layers, change the background, create geometrical shapes, write text with the virtual QWERTY keyboard, create more pages, insert images, and create audio recordings. The audio recordings can be placed as shortcuts on the pages, which is especially helpful for linking notes to the corresponding audio. Pages can also be copied to other notes, which can be useful when organizing lectures by topic or something like that. I'd say there's a bit of a learning curve to the app itself. It's not super hard to get into, but there are so many different options which sometimes are not 100% clear on how to use them at first. And of course, let's talk about taking notes itself. That's possible with the included Stylus, which has a very low latency. I didn't find any official numbers, but subjectively it seems to be pretty much the same as on the Huawei MatePad Paper, which is 26 milliseconds. But keep in mind that this low latency is only available with the pre-installed apps. Other apps installed later have noticeable input lag, same as on any other EInk tablet. There are a few options to select the brush type, line width, and different grayscale colors. Deleting is done with the virtual eraser you have to manually select in the UI. There are also a few modes available to choose from. The handwriting recognition works extremely well, even better than the one on the Huawei MatePad Paper, which I thought was pretty nice already. When writing on the display, the pen makes a bit of a scratching noise, which somewhat resembles the sound of a pencil on paper. The resistance is also similar and not as smooth as on the Huawei MatePad Paper. Which is better is simply a matter of taste in my opinion. Both approaches have their strengths and weaknesses. Generally, the note-taking experience is very pleasant. Thanks to the low latency, writing on the screen feels very natural. You can still perceive a bit of input lag, but that's to be expected and isn't distracting when writing. I also like that you can simply put down your hand on the display by default and not trigger unwanted actions on the screen. That also makes the writing experience much more natural than on any regular tablet, where I feel like the palm rejection doesn't always work as well as intended. Reading PDF files on the Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus is pretty much one of the best experiences you can get on any EInk device. For two reasons. First, the EInk screen is large and crisp enough to just simply view large PDF files with good readability already. And second, the viewing options are great. The software offers so many different customization options to view PDF files that I doubt you will run into any problems even when reading the strangest formatted PDF files. The standard options include cropping page margins to remove unwanted white space, zooming in and out, and switching the display mode from one page to a scrolling mode, where you can simply scroll through the whole document vertically. The best thing about the PDF viewer is the navigation mode in my opinion. It's like the columns mode on pocketbook devices on steroids. Instead of just being able to activate it, you actually have a few options to customize it as well. You can choose your own margins and set the viewport, which also helps very much with different format PDFs. You can also select the direction on how the next cropped view is shown. Especially helpful with this mode are the dotted lines on the page, which help in finding your last reading position quickly when moving to the next view. Besides all of that, you can also manipulate contrast levels, make text bolder, and sharpen images with a few sliders. There's also a split screen view available for showing two documents besides each other. Show a notepad or open a translation view with Google, Bing, or Baidu Translate. For Google, there's a limit of only 500 words per day, which at least for me doesn't make that really an useful option. Note-taking with the pen works as expected in PDF files as well. Just use the pen to add notes and markings to the page. The input works with the same low latency as mentioned previously. The regular ebook app is also packed with features, although I feel it's not as well optimized for Western markets. There are few settings only needed for Asian languages, which you can't remove. Not that big of a deal, but I still would have preferred the UI with less unneeded clutter. But of course that might be different for you, because you don't only read in Latin letters like I do. The text styling options are adjustable with sliders, so you can pretty much adapt anything you like. Text size, word spacing, line height, and margins. There are many fonts already pre-installed to choose from. Notes can be taken with the virtual QWERTY keyboard after selecting text, or directly with the pen on the page. The dictionaries have to be installed after setup, which can be done directly when using the dictionary function for the first time. The dictionary selection is rather limited, mostly to Asian languages with only a few exceptions sprinkled in. You can create or download your own dictionary files from the internet, but to be honest, I'm not a big fan of having to do that on a €500 device. It's nice to have that option, of course, but there should be plenty of dictionaries available to choose from the get-go. You can also use external dictionary apps if you preferred. Other than looking up translations in the local dictionary, you can also use Baidu, Bing, and Google Translate as mentioned earlier. It's also possible to look up words in Wiktionary directly. I will only mention the inbuilt ebook store briefly because that's just a collection of free public domain books. You can access it from the main menu and directly download books to the device even without an account. So if you want to read contemporary literature, you will have to use another store, which is easy thanks to Android expandability. So this review got much longer than I actually intended it to be. But there's simply a lot to talk about with this device. So what's my overall opinion of the Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus? I'm a little conflicted, to be honest. On the one hand, it has some really awesome software features which make Android usability on EInk great. It also offers good customization options which are well thought out, and it is rootable as well. And let's not forget the good build quality and hardware in general. But on the other hand, there are quite a few annoyances. The not so perfect pen placement on the side of the device, the strange shadows on the screen, and the not so perfectly translated, a bit cluttered and sometimes unintuitive UI, just to name the most important ones. All the mentioned drawbacks are no deal breakers on their own in my opinion. I actually think many of those are minor issues, but put together, they can be a deal breaker nonetheless. Especially when you take another look at the price tag of over €500. I feel like an EInk tablet for that price should be flawless. So would I recommend the Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus? Yes, if you want a powerful EInk tablet with useful software features, a great note-taking experience, incredible PDF viewer, color temperature adjustment, and if you're willing to compromise on the mentioned downsides. No, if you're like me and expect an absolutely flawless device for that price. Let us know what you think about the Onyx Boox Note Air 2 Plus in the comments below. Am I too nitpicky, or do you feel the same way about the mentioned drawbacks? I'd really appreciate it if you like this video and subscribe to the channel to help out with the YouTube algorithm. It just takes a second and is free, but would help me tremendously. Thanks for your time and see you in the next one.